Stuart Holbrook has spent his life in the world of collectors. As president of Theriault, the world's leader in the auction of antique dolls and figurative art for over 30 years, he's managed the often personal and always wild world of collecting and collectors. His market expertise and knowledge of trends comes to life in The Curious Collector, where he shares his experience and experiences in real-life stories, alongside sage advice on how to build great collections within the happy life of a collector.
This week on The Curious Collector, I'm tackling a subject that I don't know how to frame it in any other way, but everyone's been afraid to tackle. And that is the concept and the idea of dolls being creepy. And I know I'm not exposing anything unknown here that people are not aware of, because every collector, everyone who's been involved in dolls and has a doll collection has heard the term, many times, incidentally, by their own family members who grew up with the doll collection or the doll room and said, I couldn't go in there at night, or those dolls, they just kept staring at me, and using this word, creepy. And it's a common word. It's sort of caught on as the zeitgeist of people's comments as to their depiction or understanding of what a doll is to them. Oh, it's creepy. And we hate it. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. It's not a good term. It doesn't exactly help our industry or the understanding of the joy, importance, the history, the stories, the aesthetics of a beautiful piece of figurative art. And we think, as collectors or aficionados of the doll genre, that how could other people think this way? Why do they think this way? What is it about a doll that just makes them feel, and I don't want to say creepy. I think creepy, the actual word, has sort of caught on. I think a better word would be uneasy. A sort of an uneasy feeling around the dolls and what exactly is behind all of this. So I kind of want to tackle first an awareness and an understanding of how this developed over the years, and looking at the background of some studies that have actually been done on this very subject, and my own experiences in working with some of the others who encounter these feelings and trying to help explain to them, A, why they feel that way, B, why it's wrong, and C, helping them to understand a different perspective and a way to look at a doll that brings positive emotions. So I want to start off with a third grade lesson. You're probably thinking, what? And this was a really fascinating encounter that I had just last year, actually, when I was approached by the granddaughter of a major collector in New England who was doing a school project in third grade that involved them interviewing someone who is a leading expert in a particular field and doing it live so that the whole class could be presented this interview and it could be discussed. So it was a really interesting moment. My first reaction was, oh, wow, third graders. And then my second reaction was, when she told me what the topic would be, creepy dolls, was, oh, wow, this one's going to be quite a hurdle. I'm not the most experienced educator of third graders, so I had no idea what to expect. And here I am tackling a subject that is clearly one that has a lot of emotions and a lot of sort of visceral feelings with certain people, especially perhaps with third graders. But the one that I knew I could count on with third graders is they're going to tell it like it is. So why not? Let's just tackle it and let's give it a go. So I did this seminar, live sort of TED Talk interview with this third grade student who's the granddaughter of the collector. And she gave me the list of questions ahead of time. So I had to research and study a few things. One of them being, she wanted to know my take, my feelings, and my thoughts on Robert the Haunted Doll. So I'm like, Robert the Haunted Doll? I don't even know what this is. So I went and Googled it and looked it up. And apparently this is quite the doll out there in the cultural world of social media and people talking about it, but it's in a museum in Key West. And it's a large stiff clown. So now we have the combination not only of a doll, but a clown. So it's like, wow, there's two hits right off the bat as far as extending people's emotions even further on than just creepy. So this doll apparently has taken on a life of its own, no pun intended, in stories of it being haunted and stories of how it was loved by a young child in Key West, I forget the name of the boy, and had all sorts of lore behind it as to it being sort of possessed. So she wanted to know, the whole class wanted to understand my feelings about this and if this is a thing. And so I read about this and I looked at what was going on with this museum. It's a tiny little museum where this doll has actually become the major attraction. It's why everybody goes there. So I started looking at it and realizing, well, wait a minute. Now they're selling T-shirts and coffee mugs and stickers and other things of Robert the Haunted Doll. And what I began to discover is that, and I discussed this with the class, is do you see what's really at play here? This was a small museum, probably had a few visitors a day coming in. And they found something that really connected to people, whether it was positive, negative, whatever, but it had a real effect on people's emotions. So much that it started drawing more and more visitors. With that, the merch, as I called it with these third graders, became a financial windfall in the museum, being able to sell this merch to go along and create a whole persona about Robert the Haunted Doll. It was marketing 101. So I asked the third graders, I said, so what do you think really is the story of Robert the Haunted Doll? Now that I've given you all this background. And I was shocked, and it's great. And I love third graders because they'll tell it like it is. They all yelled out at the same time, money. Yes, money. This has been a big part of what I explained to them in how Hollywood, and in a sense, this museum, and in a sense, probably literature and anything else which could be money generating, has capitalized on a phenomena in recognizing that there is some sort of basic uneasiness around dolls for some people, but they could take it to another whole level to create a whole genre of productions, stories, movies, everything imaginable to make money. It's all about the money. But it had to be more. I mean, what really was behind this uneasiness that people sometimes feel? Now, I want to go back a little bit in time because I'm thinking when I started off in the 80s, late 80s, in this business, and even before that, growing up in it, as my parents started the company in the early 70s, I never really heard people using the term creepy back then. I thought a lot about it, and I just don't recall it being such a cultural thing, such a phenomena of people saying, oh, those dolls creep me out. No, in fact, I found people were really entranced by the dolls, really found them to be beautiful. These were times when you could go on talk shows across America and bring dolls, and everybody was amazed. Wow, they're so beautiful. They're so lifelike. They're so artistically rendered. And people had positive reactions to them. Nobody ever mentioned anything about them being creepy. But then suddenly, it seemed to all change. Why? Hollywood did it. Hollywood came about and realized that there is something within our emotional wiring that can be triggered by a doll if it's presented in a manner that is creepy. So we had the movies that came out, Chucky and Annabelle, and don't even ask me the other names, but you all know them. And then I think there was Chucky 2, and I don't know, there's probably even Chucky 3, and there might even be working on Chucky 4 now. But this in itself became the catalyst, became the thing that would truly kind of rewire people's brains into thinking dolls had some sort of creepiness. Now, is there uneasiness? Yes. And that is where I think Hollywood jumped on the bandwagon of being able to capitalize on that. And where did this uneasiness come from? So a study was done in Japan some years ago, I think in the 1970s, actually. So it's been around for a while, where a Japanese researcher began to study people's emotions in relationship to robots. So you're probably thinking, well, robots, that's not a doll. Well, no, it's not, but it still has relevance in this in how they did the study. When they created robots that were less than lifelike, that is, didn't have the characteristics, look, or actual ability to sound or be human, they actually liked it. They liked them. They felt comfortable. However, what was so intriguing was the moment they began to make the robots more lifelike, that is, they actually gave them figurative characteristics of human beings and made them more like us. The more they did this, the more uneasiness people were beginning to feel around them, to the point that when they were really lifelike, really human, people were absolutely uneasy. They called this phenomena uncanny valley. What happened was they kept studying this over and over again, and they realized that there was this constant trigger of lifelike related to uneasiness. The less lifelike of the robot related to empathy. Now, the exact translation of uncanny valley from the Japanese is not really appropriate. The correct translation was actually something along the lines of uncanny eeriness, that people felt a sort of eeriness to something like that, that's not human being human. And so studies in relationship to dolls have found that that may be the thing that lies within a lot of people in their uneasiness. Yet, again, these studies were done in the 70s. And I believe that there was, for some people, an uneasiness around dolls because, yes, they can look very human. And I think part of it is, too, that the untrained in understanding dolls, that is, the stories that they have, or especially understanding the relevance they have had in people's lives growing up, the nurturing aspect of a doll through the advancement of age, and also looking at dolls as being something that's just childhood related, when in fact it really does extend onwards into adolescent years, into adulthood in some cases when we talk about French fashions. So this lack of understanding the background of dolls in society leads people to just look at an object that is sitting there staring at them and has no real story. I don't quite get it, because it was interesting in this third grade presentation that I did. I actually mentioned to the class, I said, now, if a doll is creepy, why isn't a car creepy? And there was silence. And this is, I guess, why I will never be a third grade teacher, because I don't know what I did, but I opened the door for one boy to scream out, "They are creepy. I almost died in one in an accident." So that was definitely not the right analogy to use, but it did get the point across. And that is that dolls are also just an object like a car or a toy or a baseball card or a painting. It's an artfully created or industry created object, and yet people still have this feeling. What's really interesting to me too in this whole genre of robotics and talking about uncanny valley and how they come to life and the more lifelike they are, is the subject of automatons, because there's nothing that is more approaching the theory of uncanny valley than an automaton, because it is ultimately robotic. I need to do a whole segment on automatons at some point to talk about them, because I find them to be one of the most fascinating areas within our genre of items, and have had a long love and a fascination with the mechanics of automatons and how they operate. And I was actually really recently with a group of people. One of them was a programmer, and he was talking to me about his fascination with automatons as being the first programming. And I asked him, well, do you find them creepy? And he said, no. Why would I find them creepy? They're genius. So why do dolls not have that same thing? Why do automatons get a free pass in this? They actually have movement. They actually almost come to life, yet they seem to be immune to this. And I can't quite understand it. It is another area that needs to kind of be studied and looked at from the emotional response aspect of how people view them. But I did present this concept to the third graders. And interestingly enough, this granddaughter, who was the initiator of the interview of the collector in New England, who happens to have a lot of automatons, said to me that the automatons were the thing that kind of scared her the most because they came to life. So maybe for children, the automatons have a definite trigger, but for adults, they seem to be very acceptable and almost like a version of theater, if you will, rather than a doll. So I found that kind of fascinating. However, there is one mechanical doll. It's not really an automaton, but it is a mechanical doll that I'm going to admit to you all that I find creepy. I don't know what the heck the German doll manufacturing companies were thinking when they invented the character baby doll that had wind-up movable eyes. I mean, I have a list, and I think I'm going to do a segment at some point on this particular subject of the wildest, strangest patents and inventions ever done with dolls. And this is definitely on the list. So this was a character baby that had on the back a wind-up mechanism, and it was a clockwork mechanism. So you just wind it up a little bit, and the eyes will slowly move back and forth, and they will do it for like 20 minutes. They're rare, obviously, because, I mean, who would buy this for their child? It's a doll that the eyes move by themselves. So that is one that I absolutely, from a mechanical perspective, find really hilarious. And I always joke whenever they come up for auction that if you have house guests that you're kind of tired of them staying with you, just sneak this into their room at night when they're in the bathroom brushing their teeth and put it up on a shelf, wind her up, and then let her go. I'm telling you, they will wake up and see those eyes moving on that doll, and they'll be gone in the morning, and you'll never see them again. So it's the only good use for this particular doll because it's very funny. But I'm digressing and going off in tangents here. So I'm going to get back on track with all of you to go back into the falsities of really calling dolls creepy, only that particular one. So how do we overcome what Hollywood has built? What is actually, yes, a latent sort of emotion that we all tend to might have in looking at such a human object that is so lifelike, yet has no real soul. That's one of the arguments people have. You're looking at this item, its eyes are staring at you, but inside there's nothing. Well, that in itself is the problem. See, collectors, they don't see nothing. What they see are stories. Yes, they see the aesthetic, they see the beauty, they see the artfully rendered three-dimensional characteristics of us as human beings. But more than that, what takes away the creepy label for them is that they do have a certain level of stories within inside that give them characteristics and give them a life. What is that life? It's the person who made the doll, the artist that created it, the people that may have owned it, the stories that it has from the original owners, the joy it brought people through their family heirloom that passed on through generations. All of these things give life to this object that actually then create positive emotions. So a lot of what the creepy aspect is based on is lack of understanding and knowledge, lack of really being able to look at a doll and see it for more than just a figure that looks like us, but something that really is filled with wonderful, positive backgrounds and history that connect with people in a wonderful manner. And the second you do that, the second you can relate to people this part of the story, you have turned the creepy away and you've given a doll something far more understandable and far more approachable in people respecting them. An example of this is the years that I've worked with the Barry Art Museum in Norfolk, Virginia, right up from the original concept being developed of this museum and working with the Barry family and the Old Dominion University as they were in the process of building the museum with the function and the idea of having the first ever doll wing in an art museum in the world, really. So I remember going to my original presentation and helping Carolyn Barry convey the message of what she wanted in this doll wing, though in art museum. And I remember sitting with the board and a number of Old Dominion University bigwigs and trying to help explain to them why this is such an important moment in society for us to begin to change the narrative, if you will, of dolls in public perception, to alleviate the creepiness idea. I realized at the time, as I was looking out at everybody's faces, that I really wasn't selling it well. They weren't getting it. A lot of them were very skeptical, but they were going with Carolyn Barry's wish on this, and they had committed to it. But I still felt that there was some trepidation as to how people would really react to this and would it be popular. And I kept convincing them that if stories are told and the dolls are presented in a way that identify many other factors in how they were early opportunities for entrepreneurs that were women, probably the first entrepreneurial opportunities for women in the world in starting doll companies and making dolls. And we can look at people like Isana Walker as an example. If we looked at automatons as early studies of robotics, if we look at folk art dolls as early Americana, there were so many connections. And as I started telling more of these stories, I realized they began to start to get intrigued and they began to see beyond just the level of looking at this kind of unsettling doll and realizing it is figurative art. And that is a big one. We've got to start using this term more often, figurative art and not dolls, because that helps people connect a little bit more to the stories that they have to tell. So when they opened this wing, lo and behold, I wasn't surprised. Carolyn Barry wasn't surprised, but I have to say most everybody else was. It turned out to be, and still is today, the most popular part of the Barry Art Museum. They have fabulous art glass, nautical paintings, a number of beautiful exhibits that they have put together over the years, and yet still 5-6 years later going in, the doll wing is the one that's the most talked about by people in a positive manner, because the dolls are presented with story, with context for people to understand. And this is a great lesson for collectors who confront that moment that they open their doll room to visitors who come by to their house for dinner and say, come on over and see my dolls. So you bring them in and you can tell they're probably a little uncomfortable at first. And that's okay. We need to accept the fact that there is going to be a natural, uncomfortable feeling for some people when they see this. However, you have to make the effort to then tell the story. Tell them about the artist that made it. Tell them about the features and the uniqueness that each of them have. Talk about the fashion. This was one of the things the Barry Art Museum, I really pushed on an idea for them to relate fashion to dolls because everybody can connect to fashion history. It's something approachable, something reasonable, something that people love. And so they did, and people really did see the doll or figurative art in a whole new light as fashion mannequins in a way. So the Theriaults and the Bru fashions and the Jameau fashions are one of the most popular area of the doll wing at the Barrie Art Museum. So to me, Barrie Art Museum was an affirmation that if we can just teach people, if we can just tell them the stories, if we can relate these objects to fundamental other parts of our societal evolution through the years, through fashion, through sculpting, through women's studies, through robotics with automatons, then you will find ways to connect to people that the creepiness just vanishes in a second. So that is probably the greatest advice in how to overcome this yourself when you have people say this. Don't accept that. A lot of collectors just kind of giggle and say, oh, well, I know some people just don't like it. No, I would say challenge them. I would say, let me help you understand why you feel this way. Talk to them about Uncanny Valley. Talk to them about how Hollywood capitalized on this and took it for a run for money, and how it's based upon a lack of understanding of all these different factors. And you can actually turn people into enthusiasts. At Barrie Art Museum, the comments on this is, I have seen dolls with a whole new respect. I never understood them before. I never felt any connection to them. I found they were strange. And now I want to become a collector. This is the power of telling stories. So, sure, we got to accept too that there's a reality that people will feel this way. And I'm not saying we're ever going to change completely the idea, because we know to a certain extent there may be something kind of ingrained within our minds of looking at these three-dimensional human figures and feeling uneasy. But I've given you now the background behind it and how we can transform people's perception. And in that sense, we can create far more respect and understanding for the doll, create more collectors, create more interest, more studies. And in essence, we will evolve the entire hobby of doll collecting to whole new heights and dimensions that we have never, ever been able to achieve before because of this one barrier. And it all comes down to the simplicity of education. That's why I went in front of third graders and I took that chance. We've all got to do it. We've all got to work together in telling the stories of the dolls.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Curious Collector. The Curious Collector is hosted by Stuart Holbrook and produced by Tammy Trujillo. We invite you to follow us on social media and feel free to leave any questions you have for Stuart on Facebook at Stuart Holbrook-Theriault or follow the Theriault Company Facebook page. And you can stay up to date with the latest auctions and events at Theriaults.com. We'll talk to you on the next episode of The Curious Collector.